we need to talk about power scaling. What's up, guys? That guy with a pencil here from that I do to have it on me and keep it on me at all times. Another fun fact, here we are for me to give you my thoughts in 15 minutes about power scaling as a concept, how important it is to narratives, how well it's integrated into a narrative, if poor power scaling does damage to a narrative, this, that, and the third. Let me start this 15-minute timer right now, and let's hop right into it. So, power scaling, at least as I've always understood it, and then Google just to make sure I understood it, was simply comparing one character to other characters within their own universe to determine how they match up, generally, where they place in their universe. This can obviously be by power, by speed, by durability, but notably, there's another layer that I've always had built into it, and I think it specifically works well with inverse scaling and not so much cross-verse scaling, to the point where I think power scaling is a fundamental part of basically all narratives now. When I think of power as a word, especially in our real world, but even and especially in fiction, I don't just think of punch punch, kick kick, run run, tank tank. I think of interactions and dynamics, right? Ultimately, when you look at, let's say, a series like Four Knights, power scaling is very important, but power doesn't come in one linear static form. We have certain characters who are massively more powerful than other characters, yet they still obey other characters and kowtow to other characters. One of the most perfect examples of that in recent memory is Lancelot, following anything that Meliodas has to say, or anything that his own dad has to say, or anything anybody has to say, because Lance, as far as we know, unless, there's certain individuals stronger than him, is the strongest guy we know of right now, thanks to his current situation, potential, and predicament, yet other characters have more power than him. Think of it like this. Who is the most powerful person in our universe, on our planet? Who's the most powerful human being? Is it the literal strongest guy on Earth? I don't even know who that is right now. But still, regardless, is it the guy who can deadlift 1,000 pounds? Or is it the guy who can command who knows how many hundreds, if not thousands of people to lay siege to the guy who can deadlift 1,000 pounds? And then the people beneath that person would just do it. Obviously, even if the guy who has more strength physically and is more tanky physically, and I mean, like, speed doesn't usually correlate, but usually in a case like what I'm specifically comparing here, even maybe faster than the guy who has control over the hypothetical army, the guy with the army is going to be stronger despite having less stats. And that's why I have the fundamental belief that power scaling is fundamentally a part of every single narrative ever. And note, I must make a very specific distinction when I'm talking about power scaling. I don't mean cross-verse power scaling. I'm specifically referring to inverse power scaling. Now, it'd be like, what exactly do you mean by that? I mean inverse scaling is in the sense of how characters interact inside of the universe and how the different aspects of said characters interlock and intermix with each other. Sticking to the Lancelot example, Lancelot is unbelievably powerful, yet he has a lot less influence than you would think for a character with his level of ability. He is stronger than numerous characters, yet he still kowtows to them because they have a different type of power than him. And I think this is present in literally all narratives. Transcending narratives a little bit and still staying in inverse power scaling, not necessarily cross-verse, let's talk a little bit about Sakamoto Days and how it also is heavily reliant on power scaling. Notably, Sakamoto Days is a fighting manga, right? It's a comedy manga, but it's also a fighting manga. So naturally, it's going to be heavily based around power scaling, aka how one character interacts with one determines how they're going to interact with other characters in the universe, especially with this being a continual series. It's slightly different in a one-shot, because, like, usually any sort of conflict that takes place in a one-shot also will end in that one-shot, and then, of course, one-shots get sequels, and there's continuation, and then you have to reference back to the one-shot. Obviously, I'm talking about JJK Zero in that sense, leading into main series JJK, into JJK Modulo, but specifically, in the most general sense, power scaling will obviously be relevant to narratives that are about combat, right? You could argue a narrative like Four Knights isn't fully about combat, but I'd say it's really heavily about combat. You could definitely argue a narrative like Sakamoto Days is 100% based around combat, but still, there's character influences. But I think a very important thing to note about power scaling, why I say it's so important, and why it is a fundamental, base aspect of narratives that doesn't really get the respect it deserves in terms of inverse stuff, is very specifically the idea that people try to do in terms of separating power scaling in the narrative, when the narrative, in terms of inverse, is literally built on top of the power scaling. Obviously, when you think of narrative structures, you think of things like world building, character establishment, maybe literal world history in some cases when you continue down the world building route. But I think a thing that people don't really think about all too much is that power scaling is like beneath all of that. If you're unpacking an entire narrative, you're going deeper and deeper and deeper. And at the foundation, you're not going to find characters. You're not going to find, I guess, world building. I guess you're really going to find power scaling. So what do I mean by that? Think of it like this. In a narrative like Kagurabashi, for example, why do certain clans have the influence that they do? Is it because of the history? Okay, let's say it is. What gave them the right to said history? What gave them the ability to propagate and control said history? It would undeniably be their power and how they use said power to influence the world around them. That is just a fundamental part of the narratives involved. It is literally intertwined with said narrative. You cannot remove it without breaking the narrative. And that's the big thing that I see, especially when power scaling is often discussed. Because I think people have almost been too exposed to cross-verse, and even, I will say, occasionally some inverse scaling, to the point where they forget that a narrative is built around the scaling. No matter what kind of narrative it is. Obviously, right now I'm focusing a lot on battle mangas. These types of narratives that are heavily based around combat. Even this last narrative I'm about to discuss, Ichi the Witch, is also pretty heavily based around combat. But I'd say definitely one of the more flexible ideas I have here, in terms of what the narrative is actually based on. But, notably, every single main character in Ichi the Witch exists in the position that they do because of the power they innately hold. And sometimes that power is a literal stat, and sometimes that power is actual ability. From Descaros to Ichi to Komugi to Gokuraku, all of these characters operate in the positions and functions that they do because of the power that they have. And that power is intrinsically tied into their characters. If you remove the power that any of these characters have, I'm talking even as low as Komugi, they literally cannot perform their narrative function. You cannot remove power from a narrative without breaking it at all. And it is crazy to think about in this way. Notably, I started to go really, really deep into this idea, right? To be like, okay, I'm thinking this, but obviously I'm a power scaler, right? So I'm going to go down any route I can to sort of justify my own beliefs and my own ideology of like, yes, power scaling is dumb, stupid, important. But I really started to dive into the idea of like, okay, sure, it's important in a manga like Ichi the Witch. Another manga that, even if it isn't very battle shonen, still has a lot of conflict in it that is based around battle. Sure, it's very prevalent in something like Kagurabachi, a story that is entirely predicated around the actions and the abilities of characters to execute those actions. Sure, obviously it's present in Sakamoto Days, literally a comedy battle manga. So power scaling is going to be important no matter what, because of the core foundation of how the narrative progresses. Same thing with Four Knights of the Apocalypse. Ultimately, if these characters didn't have powers, you couldn't tell the story of Four Knights. This, that, and the third. So I really started to dive deep into it and be like, okay, what's a narrative that seems so disconnected, so far out from power scaling, that you can't really link it back, or at least you wouldn't think you could link it back until you actually look at it a little bit deeper and start to unpack the narrative and look at that foundation. I thought, and it's gonna sound really, really silly, but you know what I thought of? I thought of the tortoise and the hare. That is what came to mind for me. It may be like, of all things, the tortoise and the hare? Why is that the narrative that comes to mind in terms of trying to prove that power scaling is a fundamental part of literally every single narrative? Well, I have a question for you. And it's going to be a very silly question, but it's a question nonetheless. If you were to read The Tortoise and the Hare, and you had these two characters, the titular characters, the tortoise and the hare, have the exact same stats. This is gonna sound super silly. I know it sounds silly, but if they had the exact same stats, could you tell the same story? Obviously, The Tortoise and the Hare is a narrative about overconfidence, and specifically, the idea of being slow and steady and consistent in something is the best way to succeed, rather than just being crazy and out there and different in a whole variety of ways. That's what the narrative is about. That's the moral of the story that you're supposed to take away from it. However, when you think about it, if you were to give the tortoise and the hare the exact same stats, the story doesn't work. Because the tortoise and the hare's actions, the basis and fundamentals of both of those characters, is intrinsically tied into their stats. If the hare wasn't so much drastically faster than the tortoise, then it wouldn't have just left the race midway to go eat and chill and take a nap and lose the race to the tortoise. If the tortoise was just as fast as the hare, then maybe it would also make the same mistake. Like, you can't change their power levels, or in this case, their speed levels, without breaking the narrative. And isn't that insane? But then I was like, okay, sure, tortoise and the hare, that's one way to go. That's pretty darn deep into it. But, like, still, I guess technically, even if the moral of the story doesn't necessarily have too much to do with the competition, it still is competition, right? Conflict. And of course, conflict is foundational to every single narrative ever. I think maybe if you go even deeper than Powerscaling, you're going to find conflict. But I was like, okay, maybe I'm tweaking and geeking, bro. Maybe I'm tweaking and geeking. There's no way I can find a way to introduce Powerscaling into something that has nothing to do... Yeah, have you heard of Blue Box? Have you heard of any romance story in general, right? Where there are characters pining after a certain character's affection, you know? Just like every romance story ever, from the classic Disney stuff all the way to more modern stuff. Have you ever noticed that even those stories involve power scaling, but not in the way that you would typically think of it? Power scaling as in where one character stands in the relation to another. The most base, core, foundational definition of power scaling is how one character relates to another in terms of a narrative. And ultimately, even romance stories like Blue Box are heavily based in how characters compare, how characters interact. And ultimately, the power that one character has in relation to another will determine who they end up with by the end of the narrative. And it is when you see people get disappointed that X character doesn't end up with X character, it goes to show, oh wait, in that case, then one character had less power than another. And you see people get mad over stories when they don't go away they expect. Why? Because they were reading the power scaling or interpreting it in a certain way, assuming that, oh, this character would match up better with this character based on how they relate to each other. That's just power scaling. It's in romance stories too. Like, I legit fell further and further and further and further and further and further and further. And it's just everywhere. Like, you can't ignore, like, this is maybe 2 tinfoil hat, maybe like upside down baseball cap levels of insanity, but power scaling, it's just everywhere. It's everywhere, and it needs to be everywhere, because you can't have everything be the same in a narrative, right? Like, the only, like, quote-unquote narrative, I guess you could say, like, it doesn't have any power scaling at all, no matter what, is like a narrative that's like one word, end. But even then, end has more powerful than everything else on that page because it exists while nothing else does. So, like, even still, there's that. But obviously, in terms of like actual narratives, whether it be a one-shot, whether it be a multi-chapter series, whether it be an entire book series, whether it be a movie, no matter what, I feel like every single story is based around power scaling, even if there's no combat in the story. I can explain to you and reference a bunch of different romance stuff, none of which have even a single lick of mink. But there is conflict, which is based on how characters relate to each other. Would you look at that? The power scaling is right there. The tortoise in the hare. Like, I still, like, when I thought of this one in particular, I was like, I have to be going insane. But no, it's true. It's true. If everything was homogenous in a narrative and there was no way to compare characters to each other, then there would be no story to tell. If you have a story that doesn't have some form of power scaling in it, I genuinely don't think it works. Like, this is insane to think about, but at its core, I think it makes sense, right? Coming back up from the literal rabbit hole, I know it's a hare, but rabbit hole, think of it like this. If we were to simply look at power scaling and its core fundamentals, the idea of what it is just comparing characters, right? Obviously, you can compare characters in terms of power, you can compare characters in terms of strength, you can compare characters in terms of speed, durability, intelligence, hexes, all of that is relevant in some way. Even comparing characters in terms of appearance is, in a way, interpretive power scaling that is fundamental to every single story and even our own lives. Taking it out of fiction for a second to wrap this up, have you ever been walking down the street and seen a gargantuan individual, rippling with muscle, jacked and juicy, and been in your dome piece like, man, I'd be deep fried if they tried me? I have. And trust me, that's just power scaling. It's part of every aspect of your life. Are you employed? Guess what? Unless you are the boss of your own world, you have a place in the power scale. And it's beneath your boss. Even if you are entirely self-employed and entrepreneur, you are power scale within the grand scheme of humanity, because you do not control the world. Everyone has a place in this world. And comparing our places is power scaling. Whether that be in terms of our raw strength, whether that be in terms of our raw speed, what assets we have, what control we have, how many people we know, all of that base fundamental act of comparison between separate things is power scaling. So, next time someone goes to tell you that power scaling doesn't matter, ask them how they think they do against the best MMA fighter in the world in combat. And watch as they fall. But I am out of time, so please let me know your thoughts on power scaling in the comment section down below. Do you guys think I made literally any sense in this video? Do you guys think I'm absolutely losing it or have lost it more than I already did? Or do you think that maybe there are even levels or narratives that I missed? I obviously went down like childhood stories, combat stories, and like romance, but is there any narrative out there that you think doesn't have any power scaling at all, or power scaling isn't fundamental to? Do you think I'm broadening the scope of power scaling a little bit too far? I'm going way past the 16-minute mark, so I think that's what you're watching. If you made it all the way to this video, please leave scales of power? Let's just be fun with it. Scales of power in the comment section down below. I want to thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you hit that little notification bell so you don't miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, even have a Patreon below where you support me for as well as one. You can $1 a month. Things like exclusive videos, early content, and more. Also, now become a member to the channel for as well as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. So those perks include live reactions to the series I have to review, ad reactions to all my videos, early ad free access to all my videos, early ad free access to all my videos, not just here on the main channel, but on the second channel that I go through the actual link in the description down below and in the card in the upper right hand corner. On top of that, I do have a link to my Twitch down below. I stream every Friday 8 p.m. ES Tizzle. Feel free to roll through. On top of that, I do have a link to my Ko-Fi down below where you can drop 5 views on a short video, or 20 views on a long video. Any views at all, any support is always greatly appreciated. Now I want to thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is That Guy with a Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our sketch tier members: Eternal Flame, Riddle 4765, Astro, Glacier XZ, Zera, J2MA, Buddha Uda, Yuki Ally, Grim, Ollie, DeBoy, Corey Watson, Damon Brown, Tim Thomas, Kaving, OrXN, Dead Mean, Keon Stewart, Edwin Idwignoba, Straw, Antavius Mitchell, Superflame Zero, Weary Exile, Alex Kenny, Todd, The Practical One, Landon Clapwick, Heath Nelson, CAET, Plan Crone, Brandon Payne, Black Sage, Multi-Batman Superman, Zalims, Joe Bean, Sleepin' John, The Young Family Pastel Pandora, Mosity King DKG, Ecolati Babatunde, at JDog2656, Union Eye, Funny Dude, Athenzi Shear, Sino King, Sheesh King, CCC, Enzo, Kitty Liddy, Gerald Harris, Dino, Victor Jacobs, Axis XE, RTM, Gangatron, Praise the Sun, Blast, Magic, and Andrine Bonnet. And then I'd like to give a thank you to our line art tier patrons: Dread Zoan, Kevin Encarnacion, Lil Kodo, and Sean. Then I'd like to give a thank you to our ink tier members: Shrimp the Fourth Shrimp 06. Then I'd like to give a thank you to our digital art tier members: J Warrior and AZ Void. I'd like to give a final thank you to our colored art tier patrons: Walkie Munoz and Walkie Munoz.